Welcome to the King James Virgin, a
Podcast?
I'm Nick.
Three dudes in a table.
Yeah. Welcome to the King James Virgin, where each and every week my friends Alan and Adam recount Bible stories from their childhoods to me. I've never heard them before. My name is Nick.
My name is Alan.
My name is Adam. My brain is, a little scrambled right now because Nick, literally before we started recording this, just dropped that a lot of the people on PBS Kids shows were doing community service.
So let's say some. I don't want to ruin a lot of shows.
I just that's breaking my brain a little bit right now.
I think it's a fun way to get people involved, give back, put some terrifying people on television.
Yeah. Fred Rogers actually was doing time for shoplifting.
He murdered his wife.
I was going to say for any of the...
you don't do community service for murder.
Well, he did it a long time.
Oh. Yeah, it was a real long
That's
community
true.
service.
You are now Mr. Rogers forever.
You get it. Hold on. You do a murder and get a TV show out of it?
He was actually on house arrest.
Right. Oh, that's why he was just at his house.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, so when he go, was it just back?
They never show him from the ankle down.
Yeah. So they do.
Yes.
The shoes.
Right. Yeah.
So Nick, this is sort of part 3.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Even though we're not treating it like a part 3 for some reason.
Right. But it is one of the few times that we've done a few episodes consecutively.
In order.
Well, and right after this story, the book basically goes into fast forward, and we just jump millennia through different highlighted stories.
Kind of go straight to Noah, right?
Enoch's in there, Methuselah's in there. Things get
it's a little babies.
That's what I mean. They just are going launching through thousands of years with here's a person, here's a person, here's a person, and you're just 200 years, 400 years, 800 years,
right?
969 years.
Fuck yeah, Methuselah.
Anyway, we're doing the story of Cain and Abel today.
Great.
Nick, what do you know about the story of Cain and Abel?
Well, I want to talk about it more later, but I think I know a bit only because Cain and Abel were part of one of my favorite comics. Which
one?
The Sandman. They were part of the universe of The Dreaming. So I know that you have the first murderer and their brothers and the mark of Cain and all that. Oh, okay.
I'm very curious as to what the mark of Cain means to you.
I'm also very interested to see where quote unquote fact just bleeds over into comic book mythos.
Well, and that's I'm actually really interested to hear the story because I would read the comics when I was younger, knowing that these were biblical characters without having the context.
Right.
And so my whole mythology is based on this. And we'll talk about it in a bit, but there's actually a really interesting different writers that took over the series started to change whether or not it was the actual Cain and Abel or just representations of them. And so there is part of their story that's supposed to be these are the biblical Cain and Abel. And then no, they're just the archetypes.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, it's weird.
I should say before we get started, I had a thing happen this week where it was this makes sense because I know the Bible.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I was finishing up this season of Westworld. This is not a spoiler, but there's 2 big AI computers this season. Very, very iRobot-esque. Mm-hmm. And the first iteration they called Solomon, which makes a lot of sense because it's wise. It's planning the future of humanity, etc. But then it's not a plot point whatsoever. But the next gen of the computer is Rehoboam.
Oh, interesting.
Which is Solomon's son in the Bible and the first king of Judah. Anyway, I was just
that's fascinating.
I was that's a thing I know.
Yeah.
Does it?
It does not matter at all
To the story.
Nope.
Okay. Because that could be interesting. Just projecting those things. It'd be they probably just looked up who was Solomon's child.
Yeah. But it was just I had a moment this week where it was I know that.
And I did not note those names at all.
Did you finish this season?
I did.
I still haven't. So.
Ending was it was okay.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine.
8 episodes is short for a series right now, I think.
Yeah. The middle of that season was real good. Yeah.
I'm excited to start it.
I know we won't talk about it more because that's not this podcast.
Nope.
Anyway,
should we just jump into this thing?
Yep.
So we left off with Adam and Eve getting
they got the boot.
Yeah, they got kicked out of their apartment and they put up a nasty doorman at the
4 faces, 4 wings,
swords, flaming sword,
brass hooves.
Yeah. And so they can't go back. And like the first little bit is just them kind of being bummed that it's like now it's hard to grow shit. Like
Not
shit
in the Bible.
Oh, really? Oh, well.
I mean, that's part of the curse from God. But
Right.
like they're not sitting there and be like, I'm sad.
Yeah.
Like that's not a text.
And so it went that Adam and Eve were bummed.
Yes. And so they have a couple of kids.
Sure.
Twins, I believe. Are they twins? No.
They're not twins.
They're not twins. Okay.
Actually, chapter 4 starts with, and then they fucked. It does. It's now Adam knew his wife.
Right. Which is in the biblical sense, this is what they're referring to.
Yeah, I think we've covered that.
Yeah.
Yes. So they are not twins.
Okay. And I believe Abel is born first.
False.
Okay. It's Cain. Cain is okay. See, this is actually the thing that like I couldn't remember. So Cain is born, Abel, and then Abel is born. Somewhere in here, God basically goes, by the way, as part of this weird deal, you're going to have to start doing sacrifices and to basically atone for all of the shit that you have done. And the way that I want you to do a sacrifice is I want you to take an unblemished lamb. So something that like does not have any physical blemishes. The idea, I think, that you wanted to choose like your best. You couldn't just say like, well, I got the sick lamb that's going to die anyway that nobody wants. You have to get like your best, take it, cut its neck, drain the blood, put it on a burning altar as a remembrance for what you've done. Essentially, like you have now like caused this.
He tells them this while they're getting kicked out.
So
right after.
So are they still on speaking terms? What's
so
going
here's
on?
the thing, Adam. No, he does not tell them any of that right now. Which makes the following story not make any sense. In my head, because at some point in the Bible, which I did not look up, God does say this whole sacrifice thing. It's a very ritualistic. It's the unblemished firstborn, perfect sheep, blah, 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 which would make a lot of sense.
I didn't think that Adam was pulling this out of nowhere. It was all very specific.
But it would make a lot of sense for God to tell him before this story. It's not in the Bible that way.
Well, what the fuck then?
I totally agree. So
then the rest of the story does not make any sense.
I totally agree. But we're talking about the Bible here.
Okay, well, let's assume, Nick, that you were like a child like Alan and I, and we were told that this was explained to them.
Correct.
So let's just put that as this umbrella that will soon be ripped away, and then this whole thing will be wet.
Yeah.
So
there was some retconning done after the fact here.
Apparently. So Cain and Abel grow up to an age that they are now considered adults. And I don't know if that means they're over 13 or if that means they're in their 20s. I don't know what age.
The Bible does not say.
Does not say. Everybody's still alive. Well, everybody. Adam and Eve.
We're moving really fast in Genesis. So like the world has been created, man has sinned and fallen, and we're only in chapter 4.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it's wild.
It does feel like Genesis to a certain extent is the prologue in the movie where they just like, like Earth has fallen. We've developed telekinetic abilities.
Sure.
These are our stories.
The apes dancing around the black pillar.
Yes.
And we'll talk about that later.
No,
it's like adding the title scroll title scroll to Star Wars, but like after they made the movie, they're like, wow, this doesn't make sense. We should
tack this on.
Yeah.
That's better. Just like for all the cinephiles do we have any cinephiles? Anyway, it's the Blade Runner post Ridley Scott where they added the narration. That's exactly what it is. So Cain and Abel.
I think the Star Wars crawl makes sense as well.
Well,
I like them both, you guys.
The Blade Runner one just actually is a literal parallel versus a doesn't fucking matter. What was I say? Oh, so Cain and Abel are old enough where they are able to atone for themselves and not be under their parents' atonement, essentially, which isn't covered. They may have always
they're
had
not dependents. They now have to get their own insurance and pay their own taxes.
Correct.
Great.
And in the Jewish tradition, that's 12, which when we cover Jesus will be another big thing. But essentially, like, and that's kind of like also Christians tend to get their kids who aren't sprinkled baptized around that age as well. Like it's essentially that you're.
Yeah, I got baptized when I was 13, which is totally an age where you are mentally prepared to make that kind of commitment.
Yeah, I was around the same time too. I don't actually.
It's peer pressure.
Yeah, and if you're going to a Christian school, like we went through in like 4th through 6th grade, did like baptismal preparation class.
Okay,
which was mandatory. Just a weird ideological thing to put out there. But the idea being that before that, your salvation is predicated or is dictated by your parents.
Okay.
And so if your parents are saved, you're saved. that also follows if your parents are not saved, you're not saved.
Right.
Up until the point where it's your decision.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that part was glossed over.
Again, none of that is in the Bible right here, but
Okay.
we were definitely
right.
But we were definitely taught that in this context.
And that's also that's post biblical Christianity theology.
Sure.
Anyway, so Cain and Abel I'm just kind of like trying to get all the pieces.
Yeah.
And so like you understand why things are important.
Yep.
Abel.
They have no friends because they're the only humans on Earth, right?
Yes.
Correct. And eventually we start being fruitful and multiplying, which means people are fucking their siblings.
Okay. Right.
For a while.
Well, yeah. Sure.
And then first cousins, and then
Yeah. Right.
Eventually it gets to be less weird, but like it was real weird for a few generations.
I was just checking.
Yep. Abel happens to be, or they kind of have divided the labor in their family, where Abel is taking care of the sheep, or like he's a shepherd, and Cain is a gardener, and so he is growing food. And so they're both basically dividing the two things that they care about between the sons.
You can also see this as a Mesopotamian creation myth for the hunters and gatherers splitting from the people starting agriculture in cities.
Yeah. I'm reading
Which is what this actually is.
Right. Yeah. I was gonna say, I'm going to get into that when we actually start talking about it. But anyway, so they get to the point where it's time for them to do their sacrifices. Abel does his thing with gets the best sheep, does the whole spotless lamb, everything, cuts the neck, drains the blood, does the thing correctly.
Yep.
Cain goes, well, what's more important to me? He actually saw like, quote unquote, the idea behind it wasn't that it needed to be a lamb. He also didn't have any lambs. He would have to take one of Cain's.
Yeah.
But his thing is like, I've worked insanely hard on growing these vegetables, growing these fruits. These are the things that matter to me. And so I'm going to give my sacrifice of the things that I worked for, rather than just this meaningless, hollow sacrifice.
Which this is all exegesis, not actually in the Bible. But I totally agree with that.
Okay.
And so gives instead of like getting a lamb and slaughtering him, he
Makes a smoothie.
essentially and pours it on the fire.
Yeah.
Really good one.
Yeah. Like basically takes the top 10% of his shit.
Sure.
I'm pulling
Yeah,
10% out of my ass, but like just takes the top vegetables, the fruits, the things that he would want to eat and sacrifices them as in remembrance.
It's blue ribbon produce.
Correct.
What if you had to pick like a vegetable to sacrifice to the Lord? What would you pick? Would it be like an impressive pumpkin, but not necessarily delicious?
Are you asking me what I would do, or are you
like
asking what I picture?
Or like a perfect tomato? No, what would you do? Or like a perfect tomato? No,
That peach,
the perfect
man.
peach, right?
Yeah, we're back to the peach again.
That's fruit though. You asked vegetable, and I feel like vegetable is harder to come up with.
Let's see. What does the Bible say? Offering of the fruit of the ground.
Okay. Okay. Well, isn't it all?
Yeah, sure. So anything's on the table here.
The perfect peach is very good, which we've also referenced, I think, last episode.
Yeah.
But like, what would you? Like, if
But
you
when
were,
I was just thinking of like offering the best produce, I was thinking like the giant pumpkin,
correct. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So, yeah, in my mind,
like the prize pumpkin. That's
in
like,
my
whoa.
mind, it's like the spill out of the cornucopia. So there's like a squash there and a tomato there and a corn. And
yeah.
In my child mind, it's also a cornucopia. But definitely grapes.
Yeah.
That's so not impressive.
Grapes, like corn, squash.
no.
I get that it's all coming out of the cornucopia, but grapes not an impressive sacrifice.
Hold on. I think Adam's going to totally back me up on this.
Great.
Nick, in my childhood mind, his childhood sacrifice is the Fruit of the Loom logo spilling out of a cornucopia.
Sure.
It's like apple, grape.
Yeah. I have squash in there for some reason, even though I don't like squash.
So you add some things.
I add some things to it, but you're right. The things in the Fruit of the Loom logo are there.
Yes.
Agreed. I'm 90% sure this might be a Blue Book thing. Like there might be.
Oh, a picture that we saw as a young child. Got it.
It seems likely if that's so specific.
Yeah. But the ending result of this is that God blesses Abel and does not bless Cain. And basically says, God says you didn't do it right. There's also an insinuation that God is still coming down to chat with them after work.
There is a cornucopia
bit.
in the Fruit of the Loom logo. I had to look it up because I was pretty sure.
Oh my God. So I'm just imagining the Fruit of the Loom logo.
You are just imagining straight up the Fruit of the Loom logo.
Alan just was like holding his undies, being told the story. It's possible.
What did you wear in the 90s? Fruit of the Loom.
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
For reals.
Anyway, God basically says you need to do it again. And Cain, See, here's where things get confusing. Like, there's a lot of dramatization that happens.
Do you know the actual text? Because there's not a lot.
I want to try here. I think what is biblical is that there is no altercation. He just does it. But in my mind, what happens here is Cain goes to Abel and they're having a conversation about why God didn't bless Cain and why he did bless Abel. And it gets heated and more heated and more heated. And Abel's just going like, well, I did what he said. And Cain's like, no, but the point of this is that, you took your thing that you worked on. I'm taking the thing that I worked on. Gets more and more heated. And eventually Cain takes a rock and bashes Abel's head in.
So that is so many more words than what's actually in the Bible.
Wow.
But I also totally agree with Adam. Like,
so then essentially Cain and his parents and God are all together, and basically his parents and God banish Cain and said, you got to walk the earth and until you die, you are no longer allowed in our society. And that's kind of the end of my version of it.
Okay. So it's only slightly different.
Well, it just seems like there's less, right? Like Adam's explanation offers a lot more.
Correct.
Which is kind of everything that we've done here.
I'm going to shorten it a little bit. Abel brought the firstborn of his flock, and the Lord respected Abel in his offering.
That's what I forgot.
He did not respect Cain in his offering, which was the fruit of the ground. And Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. You got a frowny face. Yep. So the Lord said to Cain, "Why do you have a frowny face? Why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will it not be accepted? If you do not do well, blah, 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 blah." He's just like asking him questions.
Abel did that or God did that?
God.
Wait, so God didn't bless him and then said, "Why are you upset that I didn't bless you?"
Why are you pissed?
And then he goes on, if you do good things, if you work really hard for things and everything will work out for you, even though he just worked really hard. And like God basically goes against what he just said.
If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door.
Okay. So no, it's not the same what I was thinking. Okay, never mind.
And then
I was just thinking that God was gaslighting him. It's like, fuck this shit.
I mean, a little. Now Cain talked with his brother, and it came to pass when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, and killed him. It's just a little, there's no argument. However, I was raised definitely with a little bit of an argument and a rock.
I was going to say the rock.
We don't know. Could have been like a chokehold.
The other end of the cornucopia.
They could have been boxing. Like they could have just been like fisticuffs.
Could be like a Steven Seagal, like sleeper hold, like shh.
Yeah.
Shh. But then Adam did miss an important line.
Oh, what did I miss?
Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" And he said, "I do not know."
Fuck.
Go ahead.
No, I don't deserve it.
Am I my brother's keeper?
Yep, that's where that comes from.
Okay.
And then God immediately is like, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." And he basically curses Cain, the gardener, that nothing will ever grow for him again. So this is like,
that's interesting.
It's weirdly like anti-city.
Okay.
Because it's cursing the settlement guy who, like, he now has to be a wanderer.
I have thoughts about this.
Well, let's go into.
But is that it? I mean, that's it.
Well, I mean, then Cain went out and dwelled in the land and had sex with his sister, and then they had Enoch, who we'll discuss at some point.
Oh, okay. Interesting. So he's not banished from the community.
He kind of is.
But I mean, like Enoch.
He went out from the presence of the Lord.
Right. Also, like, so Canaanites.
But then his son turns out to be one of the holiest people ever.
Right. But like, so Canaanites, like we've talked about the Canaanites.
Yeah. Yep.
They're theoretically the descendants of Cain. So a couple things. I'm reading a book right now where they're talking about trying to get back to a pre-agrarian society, and they reference the story, and it's fascinating because essentially what they're saying is religion doesn't have has power over people post, like you need the agrarian society essentially to create scarcity, to create the need.
Agrarian society sets up power structure.
Correct.
In general.
Correct. And so for religion to have power, you need the agrarian society. And so this story doesn't actually make sense in the context of the Bible because it, like Alan said, like it's basically saying good, agrarian society bad. And so like it's more argument.
I would say it's saying that agrarian society is something that is blessed by it's not blessed by God. Fuck, because like it's like God is taking the society, like the ability to create society, away from him, which means that must be something that God has control over. Like the banishment is nomadic lifestyle, but then he's also praising the like sheep herder lifestyle of Abel.
Right.
It doesn't make a lot of sense.
The position that this book is essentially taking. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is there is a movie starring Henry Rollins that came out, I don't know, within the last 10 years called He Never Died. And it's really funny because I think I don't know if I talked about this on the podcast, but you
mentioned it. I don't know if you mentioned it on the podcast or not.
Yeah, I know I've talked to you about it, but it's because the trailer is a trip. Like people just go out and like watch the trailer because the first half of it, you think it's just like a Taken knockoff where it's the guy has his daughter and then like she's kidnapped. And so he's just got to go get her back. Like 3/4 of the way into the trailer, Henry Rollins gets shot like in the head. And it's like a way that you don't survive from, and he like falls over and then gets back up and like comes after the guy, and you're like, wait, what? And suddenly the whole thing takes a turn, and you realize that he is the biblical Cain, and the idea is like his curse was to wander the earth forever. And
Sure, that's a common thread. So, but
it's just like,
what happens to the guy that tried to kill him?
he's killed.
Like he just by Cain, or
Correct.
He just blows up.
No, he's like ripped to shreds.
Okay, that makes sense.
I believe
because there's a little part after this where Cain talks back to God and says like, this punishment is greater than I can bear. I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on earth, and anyone who finds me will kill me because I'm the first murderer. And so God says,
anyone, there is nobody. Great. Continue.
Right. Therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark on Cain, lest anyone finding him should kill him. So, God
so the mark
is like it's
protection,
marking him as evil, but protection from being killed. So, in that movie trailer, whoever tried to kill Henry Rollins should have been maybe taken out by God.
Interesting. Well, and like it's been a while since I watched the trailer, so it may not have covered it. And I haven't watched the movie yet. That's in my queue, and I just still haven't. I want to pull the trigger on it. I might have to after this because it's the thing that confused me, and it was the trip of the trailer because the trailer does not set up supernatural at all, and then suddenly just hard left turn.
I appreciate that though.
Yeah. So
I have a couple things before we get into like the mark of Cain and all that fun stuff. There are several clues that this was written later to kind of be a preface to the rest of the Bible.
Okay.
For one, their names, like Adam and Eve, Adam meaning man, Eve meaning life giver. They're like kind of puns where Abel derives from a reconstructed word meaning herdsman. So like he is anyway.
Yeah.
And they're pretty sure that's not the inverse in the sense that like, those words became that because of them. That's
a great question.
You know what I mean? Like chicken or the egg sort of.
Exactly. That's a great question. And then Cain is similarly, it means like metalsmith because later on his children become like great metalsmiths.
That is weirder given that
side quest.
Yeah.
But it's also they're mentioned nowhere else in the rest of the Bible. Like we don't hear Cain and Abel again.
Right. Oh.
Actually, no, we do hear Cain in like John or
but
something.
Usually it's just like people going,
I couldn't tell if you were just pointing or doing the jack off motion.
A little both. Like, just like, pointing towards Cain, like, don't be a fucking Cain.
And the fact that that it kind of parallels all these Babylonian myths means it was likely written again during the Babylonian exile when a bunch of priests came together and were like, we need to jot this shit down.
Actually, this book that I'm reading too is talking about like a lot of these things that the Babylonian Empire, a lot of these myths, because it was basically the first time that we'd hit like a peak civilization post developing agrarian society. And so like you had a lot of people who didn't necessarily remember it, but remember it in the same way that like maybe Americans reflect back on colonial America. And that was, so there's a lot of people going like, I miss the nomadic part of our existence. And so a lot of these
80s, 50s nostalgia.
Yeah.
There's the parallel of Enlil chooses the farmer god, in which the shepherd god Imesh and the farmer god Enten bring, I'm saying these wrong, bring their dispute over which of them is better to the chief god, who rules in favor of Enten, the farmer, which would be the opposite of this. But anyway, good times.
That's fascinating.
Well, let's take a quick break and we'll come back and talk comics and other things.
Comics and the Mark of Cain.
It's funny. I'm nervous to
comics and racism.
Yeah. It's funny that I'm more nervous to talk about comics on this podcast than I am religion because I'm more scared of comic nerds than I am religious zealots.
Well, and like you also, I feel like you have something to lose. Like if you fuck up something with religion, it's like, who gives a shit?
Right.
I'm going to say statistically, you are both very wrong. so much more violence, actual violence when it comes to religion.
Oh, I was meaning personal, like personal face, not no, correct. From a death perspective, yes, you're dead.
Yeah, yes, embarrassment totally. Maybe.
Right. So we'll be right back here on the King James Virgin. And we're back here on the King James Virgin.
So Adam, I knew like that the mark of Cain was used for racist purposes, but what do you know about the mark of Cain?
Nothing. So this is something that I was actually ignorant about. It's kind of funny. Like I knew the biblical story of Cain and Abel, just from church and from school, but then most of my stuff comes more from the way it's like thrown about in religious. Like sci-fi religious thrillers or like sci-fi fantasy religious thrillers. Like I'm just trying to think of, like it's thrown around in I think Constantine, and it's thrown around in like just different movies where it's referenced as a thing. But I didn't realize that it was used as
interesting. It's similar to the curse of Ham.
Okay. I mean, I was going to say that's where
they're basically saying he was either cursed with black skin or at least like a black face.
Oh.
But like coal black, not necessarily like black skin. But then it was used in America, yay, as a kind of a excuse for racism with like people saying there's two heavens, one for white people, one for black people.
Jesus.
Boy. And using it as like, since they were cursed to like have a hard time toiling the ground. And anyway, it's not good.
It's such a,
because the Bible doesn't say anything about black skin. That is made up.
Yeah.
No,
like the Bible.
The Bible is fair. Like it's difficult to make an argument that the Bible is anti-slavery, but it doesn't seem to. Its position on slavery doesn't seem to be necessarily race related.
Right.
Beyond the chosen people,
the race stuff is all fanfic.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the Bible definitely has a bent towards the Hebrew Jewish nation, but that's about it.
Yeah.
It's basically you're better and everybody else is just shitty.
Right. Yeah.
But there's not like, except for those people in North Africa, they're the worst. That's not in the Bible. Well, you know what I mean?
There's also some Latter-day Saint stuff with Cain and black people where they use that to kind of discriminate.
Now that you're saying this, I do vaguely remember.
But they specifically have a book written by, I think, Enoch.
The Book of Enoch sounds like
the Book of Enoch is
Is it Apocrypha?
Yes.
Okay.
But I think.
Should we just cover Enoch since we're going to come back and do it? Methuselah, oldest person that's ever lived, 969 years. One of in the same time period, there's a guy named Enoch. Enoch lived to 950 and some.
I don't know. Older.
Anyway,
I thought it was in the 300s. I didn't think it was that old.
Did he not make it that as far? Essentially, the idea is that humans have lived to 900 and some years, and we've just gotten worse and worse and worse. But
it's because we started having sex with angels and giants, obviously.
That we lost or got better. It feels like you fuck an angel, like that extends your children's life.
Oh no, the angels were fucking us.
Oh. So like what you're saying is like we were living to 900, but then an angel literally fucked us to death,
and that's why God sent the flood.
Okay.
Yeah. It's kind of in the Bible.
Yeah. Anyway, Enoch walked, like this is, I'm putting walked in air quotes, is like he communed with God to the point where he got to skip dying before going to heaven. And an Adventist like skip judgment. And God just basically said, you're good enough. You have lived a perfect life essentially. And you get to go to heaven early. And so he just took the express lane to heaven and is, to our knowledge, the only person to have skipped the line.
Elijah?
And Elijah. And Moses. Moses died. Elijah and Enoch didn't have to die. Moses died and they got to go. So he is like
So he's alive in heaven.
They all are.
Yes.
Currently? Still?
Theoretically.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you still, like getting to heaven, you still have your normal lifespan.
But see, here's the thing I don't know about.
Oh, sorry. No, that's once you get to heaven, it's implied that it's a perpetual life.
Okay.
Here's the thing I don't know about the Mormons though, because they like Jesus died and then came to America for a while. So did Enoch? If he wrote a book,
we need some Mormons.
We need a Mormon on this podcast.
I mean, he may have just wrote it and then like sent it down.
Send us a voice memo. Dear Jesus at
some like stones.
Yeah.
The tablets.
Yeah. He like chiseled them down and was like, spent whatever thousands of years writing these and just like hucked him into Utah. Maybe that's why they went there. It's like he missed it. He was supposed to shoot him into the Middle East and like missed and hit Utah. And so like, well, I guess I got a truck over there.
Adam's chiseling motion, the same as his jerk off motion. that he used earlier in this episode.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but
Don't come in here. I'm chiseling.
I'm just making some tablets.
I want to talk about comics, and I'm glad to know the actual story. So I'm pre-apologizing if I get any of this wrong because I read these comics a long time ago and just kind of flipped through them again for this. Don't at me. So you guys don't know Sandman stuff?
I think
Not at all.
I own a couple of I think the first omnibus, and we've talked about this before,
Sure.
but 80s art doesn't sit well with me.
So it's part of the DC Vertigo Comics universe.
Is there some crossover with Hellblazer with John Constantine?
There might be
In my mind, they're tied some reason.
the world of the dreaming plays into a lot of DC and Vertigo. These characters will pop in and out of things.
Right.
And I think that the dreaming is still ongoing. There's also, I think yesterday or something, Netflix announced that they're doing a series of the dreaming. So you might like that.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Yeah, we were talking about this before the show. I have apparently a weird hang up where this is something I'm gonna get hate mail for, but I typically do not enjoy Neil Gaiman's original work. I very much love his derivative work.
Yeah.
That works.
You want him at the writer's table.
Yeah.
I really feel like you talked about this on one of the last 2 to 5 episodes.
Oh, really?
Maybe.
I mean,
possible.
maybe it was off mic, but
So originally, Cain and Abel were the hosts of a horror comic anthology series that DC did.
The characters were?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Hold
Hold
it
on,
was
Cain and Abel were?
yeah, if it was
was Abel a zombie?
no, they're both
Fine.
alive characters.
And hanging out together.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Oh, that's important. And along with Eve. So these were 3 of the crypt keepers basically.
And Adam is just fucked off. Well, I mean, that isn't Adam's character. He just fucks off and go.
I don't think that there's an Adam character.
Okay.
I don't remember an Adam. So Eve is also in the Sandman comics. Cain is often referred to as the Abel caretaker. Well, get it?
Oh, Brother's Keeper. Yeah.
interesting.
Both of them are in this comics world indestructible, possibly immortal.
Yep.
Cain is always seen as diabolically cunning, and he bears the mark of Cain, which protects him from all harm.
Is there a visual representation of it?
I don't think so.
A
I don't
symbol
think
on his brow or something.
Okay.
No.
So this is basically like Thor and Loki. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, Abel likewise indestructible and resurrects from any fatal wound inflicted by Cain. So throughout the comics,
So they're killing each other. He's killing.
yes, and it will just bang, pop back up.
Oh, interesting.
And so also, as I implied, there's constant retconning based on who is writing this story of whether or not these characters are the actual biblical characters or just the archetypes.
Right.
But the important stuff is that in the comics, Cain has a conversation with Lucifer, and Cain is the only person in the comics that can talk to Lucifer because he has the mark of Cain, and so he can safely get into hell and talk to Lucifer and come back.
Oh, got it. So because he's immortal, he
Yes.
can withstand.
Yep. And at some point he tells Lucifer, gives him his own origin story and tells him that the biblical Cain and Abel came to live in the dreaming, which is supposed to be, and we didn't talk about this, so I have a question about this. Lucifer quotes a verse in the Bible which says that Cain was sent to live in the land of Nod.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a physical place, though.
Okay, so the land of Nod then is supposed to, in this, be interpreted as the dreaming, like the land of nodding off.
I very much like that idea.
Totally. Nothing if not clever.
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman. So there's also this weird, when the comic book characters talk about, they will self-reference the biblical characters when it's not supposed to be them.
Okay.
And they'll
When
say,
they're playing archetypes.
and they'll say things, they'll debate whether or not the biblical characters are actually human looking or not, which is also a weird, fascinating thing. Because in the comics, they do look humanoid, and then they're like, oh no, we have no relation to them. They didn't look like us.
Interesting. So in the comics, when they're doing represented or archetypes, is it something that they were a normal person and then developed a skill and became a Cain, or they just were born as Cain and Abel,
Right.
but they're not the original Cain and Abel.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And Eve at some point also says that she's not Cain's mother, but Cain says something like, "Oh, but you're everyone's mother." So when they are the archetypes, it's just that they're the archetypes of the first murderer, first victim, first mother. And the character's cycle of murder and resurrection is punishment for their role in the first murder. So like they're all being punished and just like constantly resurrected.
So Abel is being punished for just being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Mm-hmm. And Cain is like very frequently killing Abel in the comics. And it's like presented as this like dark OCD where he like has to like he's compulsively killing him. And then Abel's death is impermanent and he just like recovers in a few hours. And this like OCD that Cain has, he's like, it's shown that he's like unable to control the murders and is like always remorseful over them. Jesus. Like sometimes he's maniacal, but a lot of times he's remorseful. And the important thing is that there is like a genuine bond between the two brothers. Like they are very close. It's not like they are always together. Right. And then it just is like, this thing is overtaking me. Got to kill him. Bang.
And Abel is understanding to a certain extent?
Yeah. Abel remains like totally dedicated to Cain. And this is like the really sad thing. He like frequently dreams of a more harmonious relationship between the two where he's not being killed.
Oh.
Yeah.
So in this is Abel portrayed as needing a protector, needing a Cain? Like if Cain is like the, not protector, but keeper of Abel, is he projected kind as more of like a beta?
Yeah. There's also like a visual representation. Like Cain is like kind of like cool, tall, skinny. And Cain is like this short, fat little like sidekick type of guy that's just like, just getting killed.
Oh, jeez.
Wait, Abel is the
short. Yeah. Did I say Cain 2 times? But so weirdly, when these characters pop up in the Sandman, because the Sandman is like pretty dark, Cain and Abel are supposed to be like the comic relief. And it's like
a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Yes. When you dig into it, it's really dark, but the fact that they're the comic relief kind of shows like how dark this is. Anyways, those two comic characters like really stuck with me growing up.
So is the Sandman the keeper of the dreamland or the dream?
Basically, yeah.
The dreaming?
The dreaming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. So the land of Nod is the location of the dreaming, and the dreaming is
the land of Nod is
another dimension, presumably.
Well, the land of Nod is just
another name
referred to when they refer to the Bible text. Yeah.
Got it.
Land of Nod is also Crate and Barrel's kids line.
Really?
Yeah. I knew there was like something in my head, like why does this feel?
I feel like somebody did not do some research on that. That's it's like, hey, let's choose the
Send
place
your kids to Nod.
We're the place we banished the one murderer.
Yeah.
Well, it's even east of Eden. So
it's even further east of Eden.
Yeah. What would that be? Because the Garden of Eden was in East Eden, but even further east of Eden. Well,
I mean, you're getting into like Afghanistan,
Turkey.
No, Turkey's west. You're getting into like eventually India, Pakistan,
right?
Nepal. I mean, depending on where you are.
You gotta.
Yeah.
Looking it up.
Is that? Oh
no, Iran.
Iran. Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Turkey is like northwest.
Yeah.
Wow. I was turned around.
That's basically Cain and Abel. It's kind of it's a bummer of a story because it's, oh shoot. What's the side? Fratricide. Fratricide. Wow, could not get there. So it's it's and obviously like it's the first murder but yeah, I mean,
well, it's interesting to me. I like it.
Yeah,
because I mean, it's interesting to me that when there are but 4 people, you get the first murder.
Right.
Also interesting. Like I think that your point about the agrarian society versus the hunter-gatherer society is really interesting because likewise in the book Guns, Germs, and Steel, classic, they talk a lot about the rise of agrarian society as setting up these power networks, hierarchies, and that's when murder starts happening.
Right.
Of course, hunter-gatherers, they would kill each other, but mostly because they were smaller groups, there was not as much.
It wasn't personal, and it wasn't vengeful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like from a weird socio-political angle, like this, if you look at it as a parable, holds up.
Yeah. I was going to say like, if anything through these last 3 episodes, what I've learned is that like literal Christianity has actually been doing a massive disservice to any of its people by not treating them as parables. Cause like you actually could make a direct scientific correlation of
creation, evolution.
Right. You could cover the idea of like the Greek idea of the knowledge of opposites and that duality of existence of between good and evil, and
the fall of man is just, the
knowledge.
Yeah. The more good you know, the more evil you know as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Cain and Abel, you could actually talk about
creation of society.
Right. Like these are things that you could have easily actually made your society better through these myths. And instead you've like taken them to be this, like, this has to be it's both, there's nothing beyond the surface.
It's both Christianity as I was taught, took these and like needed them to be literal, but also like worse story versions.
Yeah.
Every other story version of this that I read is so much more interesting.
It's fascinating. I would love to know,
like they needed it to be short for some reason.
Yeah. I would love to have known what the initial intent behind creating this collection of those myths, like Bubba Fuzza in Babylon, putting together these collections that eventually like works its way down.
We can't just cut to Tatooine without explaining that there's an empire first.
Right. But I mean, yeah, I just would love to know, like, was their intention to like, we need to include some like beginning of humanity bits and then it got twisted to the point where like, at what point did we go, these are literal stories, we cannot deviate from the idea that it is
kind of interesting. So say we're the like group of religious people who put together the Bible
right
in Babylonian exile, and they felt that they needed to add this to make what they had make sense.
Right.
What did they have?
Right. What was the intention
Probably
of this?
Moses leading out of Egypt.
Probably.
My guess is because everything before that feels like it was stolen from like Mesopotamia
and crazy fast forwarded, like
because Noah and all of this is Mesopotamia. So I'm going to say, yeah,
which makes sense that the oral tradition would have kicked in at that point.
Joseph, maybe the tribes.
Sure.
So
but
Abraham.
Even that feels like, Abraham.
We could say Abraham is when,
which makes sense for Judaism in that like everything goes back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as a anchor point.
That's their start.
Yeah.
And then this is all just prehistory.
Well, and like
it's actually really interesting.
You could also make
about.
Totally part of it too is you can make an argument, given that I know we haven't covered this yet, but like Abraham is the beginning of the two at that point dominant religions. Mm-hmm. You've got basically Judaism and Islam all like kicking off from Abraham. It makes sense that they needed we've covered how we got here. We should probably like cover how humanity got here.
Yeah. And maybe Cain is just like they needed to be able to make the Canaanites the bad guys. Like that's why we don't like them.
I mean, they were exiled from. Well, no, that wouldn't have been exiled from that because the Babylonians came and took them.
There would have been they would have had the big bad of the Babylonians. They would have had the Assyrians and in Egypt already. So
that's fascinating.
Anyway, it's really interesting. Yeah. I need to read that book of Mesopotamian myths.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we say every episode.
Yep.
Well, just because we've been doing these.
We've been doing it.
These stories.
Right. Yeah. All right.
So there you go, Nick. Now you know.
Let's wrap this shit up. Thank you so much for listening. You can follow us at KJVPod on both Twitter and Instagram to keep up with us. We love to hear from you. The world is really weird right now. So if something we've ever talked about like tickles a memory in the back of your mind, record a voice memo and email it to dearjesus@kingjamesvirgin.com. We just wanted to open it up.
Yeah, we want to hear your voices. We were asking specifically about like, what do you remember about this story? What do you remember about this story? If you are coming through the back catalog, have been during your quarantine, are a new listener, are a longtime listener, and have wanted to chime in about something related to you growing up and misinterpreting something or having somebody tell you something weird that has stuck with you for too many years. We want to hear about it. As long as we've covered it, we want to hear it.
Yeah. Or if it's just some sort of weird, like religious experience that relates to tangentially, just record a voice memo and send it to us. DearJesus@KingJamesVirgin.com. Thanks to Mascaras and Resurrection Records for the use of our theme song, Kicksadi, off the album El Moran. And this week's Resurrection artist is Mr. Tang, as in like the pseudo juice.
I wouldn't even call it a pseudo juice
drink. The space drink.
I can't think of another thing that Tang would mean, at least in a proper noun. I mean,
right.
Zest.
I guess it could be a name.
Senor Zest.
Senor Zest. My memory of Tang is I was being babysat by kids who were just like slightly
You're
older
gonna say
than me.
you were an astronaut.
Yeah, I was. And I was an astronaut. And they were like, I think their parents and my parents were out on some sort of like thing. And they were taking care of us. And they convinced me to drink Tang. And then after I'd finished half the glass, it convinced me that there was alcohol in it. And I, as like a 10-year-old, was terrified that I was going to get drunk and die.
Yeah.
So that's my Tang experience. Didn't touch the stuff since. Didn't touch the stuff.
The sauce.
Never touched the stuff since. What the? Whew. See, it's affecting my brain. You can find links to the songs we were talking about, Tang, all sorts of things on our website, kingjamesvirgin.com.
That'll do it for us this week. Until next week, I have disturbing news, which is that I was trying to come up with a pithy slogan and I wanted to see what Fruit of the Loom's slogan was, because I thought it was like the cotton of our lives or something, but I thought that was maybe just cotton.
Taste the rainbow.
That would be very good. The upsetting news that I have is that Fruit of the Loom is an expression referring to clothes which was named so to parallel the phrase fruit of the womb, meaning children, from Psalms 127.
What?
Fruit of the Loom is a biblical thing.
I don't like that.
Anyways, there's that knowledge drop. Okay, bye.
Rad.
Produced by Sonic Bazaar.